Okay, gotta go by one. Okay, thank you everybody. Thanks, Julie and Linda, for the invitation and for all the help. Today, the idea is to talk a little bit about one of the things that I love the most, which is DNA-based technology, and how that technology is gonna change a lot of things around us, but also how it's gonna change us. So I always bounce around this quote from Feynman, which says, what I cannot create, I cannot understand, and that's many of the things in my work. I love to build stuff. That's what the idea, and through the building, I try to understand exactly how things work. We're gonna speak about 3 different topics which I have worked on: DNA storage, biofabrication, and life quality extension. I consider this an introductory talk because we can speak hours of any of these topics. So let's go for it. Let's see. The idea is to go through 3 different phases in each one of these topics. Why this is important, like which is the problem we have that this technology actually can solve. Secondly, what we are doing right now, how this technology is moving. And third, how this is gonna affect the industry, our lives. So in the first topic, it's kind of clear to you how much data we are producing right now. And in the orange box, you are seeing the amount of data we can actually storage, but in the blue one, you're seeing the amount of data we're producing. So by 2020, we will have to deal with an abundance of data. And this is like what I used to say in my company is a good problem to have. We have this problem which we're producing a lot of information, a lot of data, which is amazing, but we need to keep that data, and that's a good problem to have. So this paper is interesting for 2016 from the people of Microsoft. They already looking at this. Then comparing the DNA storage to other kind of media where you storage information. The main comparison we can do here is, for example, to the tape. The tape technology is where you storage information for a long time. Normally, these tapes, they are meant to be around with us around 15 to 30 years. And you don't need that velocity to access this information, so with a minute, it's okay. But the DNA is pretty more interesting than that, because instead of keeping the information for 15 to 30 years, you can keep it for centuries. But we have a little problem in there, which is not as fast to code the information and read the information. It can take you between 10 seconds to hours, depends on how long the data you want to read and write. I believe that the people from Microsoft have been really conservative in their expectations, because in 2013, we read the DNA of an organism, a horse, that has around 700,000 years. So I do not believe that this media is meant to be for centuries. I believe this media is meant to be for thousands of years, actually. And this other nice paper from Nature, also in 2016, did this kind of math. All the data available at that time could be put in 1 kilogram of DNA, which is really amazing. And there it comes the question to us. What we will do as an industry when we have no limitation of storing data? And these are the industries that normally produce most data right now: the field industry, the satellite imaging industry, the health industry, the fintech industry. These are the top 4 that actually producing the most of data right now. So what we would do if we are part of that industry with this kind of tool? And this is how the data centers in the future will look like that little box. Instead of having a huge building with data, you actually will have a little box in a refrigerator with your data. And the good thing is, like, we already deal with that kind of format because we have biobanks, we already save DNA in hospitals and also in the industry. So we have management tools for dealing with that kind of format, which is, we're getting there. How this is happening right now is kind of basic, depends on the paper you read. It has different ways of coding this information into the DNA, but the basic structure is always the same. You have your message in a binary code, and then you're gonna move it from binary to actually 4 base, because you have the 4 base in the DNA. And you have to make sure to do several copies that overlap because you want to be able to, this information be retrieved at some point. It has to be reliable. Everybody so far has been dealing with these two things and with a problem. Still, DNA is kind of expensive to sequence and synthesize. So the idea is we still have that problem, that technology for actually be affordable for everybody. But this is not theoretical. This is actually a real world, 2013, if I'm not wrong, from the George Church Laboratory in Harvard. In this work, he shows that his work is able to have a bigger density of storage information than any available commercial technology and even any demonstrational technology right now, which is really cool if you see like the X. But when you see the X8, you can see also that it's still a little behind in how fast you can access that information when you compare to, for example, a flash memory. So one of the first applications people is really excited about for a long time already, this is from 2013, it's how we use DNA for long-term storage. So in this graphic, you see an orange line in the middle. That orange line is where the cost of saving information in a tape or saving in DNA is kind of the equivalent, considering that you're going to have to rewrite these tapes each 10 years. So from the current price of the DNA at that time in 2013, if you want to store something for thousands of years, you have a break-even in the price. But right now, the price has really gone down in the last 4 or 5 years. So maybe we're getting there when we are closer to 10 times cheaper for what it was at that in 2013. And at that moment, it's also good for you if you want to store information for hundreds of years. That's the first real application we can see in there. And as I told you, we have this problem, it's still too expensive, but the good thing is the prices are going down. This is a comparison between how productive is the transistor technology against reading DNA. So I love that peak when you go up because that's the second generation sequencing. And probably you saw this kind of similar graphic with the human DNA sequencing when we see that it goes really low price. It's because of that kind of technology. So we're waiting there, and if you want something, you have a problem to solve, that's a nice problem to solve. How are we gonna make the writing DNA to do also that peak? And in that moment, this is going to be technology that everybody's going to use and be available to you. So I have a side project on that topic, which I cannot show you yet, but I have one project ongoing there. And now I'm going to talk about biofabrication, talking about my first company also and my nonprofit, how this is related to biofabrication. Again, the problem. We have a growing population, which is good. We are being able to put more people in here. And we're doing it in a slower pace right now, so the rate that is going on is going down, but still we expect to have around 9 billion people in 2050, so we will need to produce more stuff. We will need to produce more food, we will need to produce more medicine. Okay, so I brought a little bit of this idea of biocatalysis to you. This is a technology that has been around for a while. This is not just, it has 10 years, at least 20 years, when we are looking at enzymes, how enzymes can do the modification from a raw material to a chemistry to a pharmaceutical point of view. And it has been around for a while. We know that enzymes are pretty interesting in a way that they are really more efficient. They work on the lower requirement of temperature and pressure, which makes a less expensive procediment. The enzymes are environmental friendly, and they are more designable and cheaper in the long run. So you have the two cycles between comparing biocatalysis and a chemical catalysis. But this is not yet something that is going on right now. Why? Because still we're beginning to understand how to design functions in microorganisms. So we need to do it several times in order to get there. So one of the things what we're doing right now is automation. So if you see at the top funded companies in the biotech space in 2016, you're going to see that at least 3 of them, which are Zymergen, Ginkgo, and Elevance, are companies working with this, automation or genetic engineering. And I used to have a company which was Arcturus BioCloud, which was also working in that same problem. We didn't raise that kind of money, but we raised some money for that. And Bold Trends is an interesting company also because they're going that step forward. Okay, we are producing silk from spiders in microorganisms because silk is an amazing material and the silk from spiders is amazing, but it's not so cool if you want to put a farm of spiders around you. So it's better to go there for the microorganisms. And Twist DNA is also pretty interesting because they produce DNA actually. So DNA is one of the raw materials for all this to happen. In Arturo's BioCloud, we have a simple idea. Like, this is how a laboratory looks like. A lot of people, a lot of equipment, and they're gonna do like the steps of designing DNA. Okay, you produce your DNA, you put it into our microorganisms, and then you check it out if you're producing your proteins. So what we do is we put the whole laboratory in this stack. We were able to build these machines. We were able to put together pieces of DNA. They were put in bacteria, and then you can say, okay, is there in the bacteria? Yeah. We were expressing a green fluorescent protein gene, which show you the bacteria in a different color. But the main idea of Arturo was not for us to have this for ourselves or big companies. We want to put this in the hands of everybody. Obviously, we have a good control of biosecurity, which I can discuss a bit later, but we put this kind of stack on the cloud. And we have around 160 cities around the world accessing these kind of machines doing basic genetic engineering. The thing is, like, the first product we had was to produce green fluorescent protein. It's like the hello world for biotech, which is really cool. You go there, you produce it, and it's $50. That's good. But the real idea is for you to get like a final product as a protein, and the whole cycle of producing that was 10 times more expensive, $500. And that's affordable maybe for big companies, but they had their own stack. But for a person who is trying to understand biotech, maybe he won't put that kind of money, and even if he put it once, it's not a matter of doing it once. You need to do it several times until you actually get the protein right. So it was not like, from the economical point of view, it's a market that is coming, it's a huge market. But I know companies are still working on this, and they have not much clients, they're running investments, so we decided to close for good. But something that came out from that idea is, okay, you have the machine, you have the technology, and the technology is coming. But what is more difficult to get is the knowledge. Because some people were access to the technology, to the machine, and say, okay, what I can do with it? And I couldn't take 1,000 people and go project by project trying to say, okay, this is how the DNA is designed. So I opened this nonprofit, which actually is focused on that, how we make this knowledge available to people. And as a Latino, I'm from Colombia, I live in Brazil, in Argentina. I have a lot of things going on also in Mexico. So I say, okay, I want to give back to my community, and I want to actually be able to open spaces for biotech where people from other areas can go and learn. And this is what we call Biohacker Spaces. So I founded 2-3 years ago Syntechbio Network. We operate in 5 different countries. One of those, and we focus on 2 different streams of ideas. One is producing open technologies for everybody to use, and the second one is to produce industry, because in Latin America we have a lack of industry in the biotech area. So we have advisors exactly for that. We have advisor Ryan Betancourt from IndieBio, which probably some of you know, and Maria Chavez from BioCurious, helping us in those 2 ideas about how the network is going forward. And this is a paper for last month, maybe some of you saw it, from the group of Craig Venter, where he did exactly what we did like 2 years ago. But it's really cool. Craig Venter is one of the huge guys in biotech, and deeply admire that guy. So if I see he was doing something that I tried to do before, kind of get a little proud about it. The difference between his machine and ours is cheaper, first. And second, he integrated the process of DNA synthesis of it. So we didn't do DNA synthesis. We work with pre-synthesized blocks, and we put them together. But he also kind of do that when you think about Gibson assembly, how it works. But so it was pretty cool to see that this idea is moving forward, and people is embracing the idea of automation to open the door to all these creations we want. How this is gonna fit our world? Okay, first we were talking about production here, but also we're thinking about going to other planets. And the thing is, like, you can go to Mars and take everything that you want in there because it's too expensive. So we need to take some raw materials there and produce an ecosystem. And one of the papers that I love about that was from Arkin, and one John Cumbers, who was a researcher in here in Ames, so probably some of you also know John Cumbers. And he laid out all the mathematics and all the biochemistry reactions that tell you, okay, if we want to go to Mars or the moon, and we want to be able to produce like the basic stuff we need using microorganisms, this is what we need. That's on the paper, and this is like the last image of the paper, when they say, okay, what we're gonna use is the initial materials as like carbon dioxide, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen. Some of them are already there, some of them we have to take, but it's easier to take these than all this room. And then use microorganisms to produce fuel, in the first case, to produce food with spirulina, to produce plastics, PHB, for example, for 3D printed, for tools in there, or in the last case, to produce actually pharmaceutical as acetaminophen, which you need to take in there. So this won't only change how we produce things in this planet, but to the other planets we're moving forward right now. And the last topic is my last company, and Chief Technology Officer at that company. I deal a lot with software, hardware, and biotech, which is my expertise. And in here, we think about life quality extension. So a lot of people say, okay, this is the why, this is an interesting thing. You see a peak in the life expectancy of the world in 2020, in 1920, and that was because we have antibiotics, we have better healthcare, we have better cleanings around our cities, so this is interesting. But you see, like the average average age right now, you can get it 70 years around the world, but you still look there, Africa, it's like 20 years down. So we also need to think about not only technology, but also social and politics and economics, how they're, for example, they're really relevant to this problem if we want to make people to live longer. Africa is one example that all the things that we did good right now are also not only science, but also all the environment that we create around us. And the idea is, okay, that's so cool, but the problem is the older you get, the more diseases you can get. Like there are long-term diseases like arthritis, heart diseases, cancer. So what's the point of being here longer if you can be healthy? And instead of just looking into having a bigger span of life, let's have a look into have a bigger span of health along all the life. The interesting point about aging, first, we don't understand how it works, nobody does. But we understand that there are some components of it that we can see in the genome. Some of them, for example, really classical is the size of the telomere. Another one is epigenetic modification, which is the regulation of the DNA, how your mitochondria works also changes along you get older. So we know there's an underlying process in the molecular level, and this is really good because we didn't know that 20 years ago. Now that we know that, we say, okay, how we can understand that process, how we can tap into that process. At one skin, what we do is we focus in a skin first because it's one of the more accessible tissues, it's one of the easiest to grow in the lab, is one that is easy to go to market because I also have to think as an entrepreneur, and also is one of the more homogeneous tissues where to study aging. So what we do is we produce human skin in the lab, we do an in vitro and in silico selection of molecules, we take those molecules to the lab and do anti-aging testing. We are able to measure the age, not like your physical age, but your molecular age in your cells. And what I'm more excited about is that we are trying to build in the long term a predictive database, trying to understand your characteristic as a person, your genomic characteristic as a person, your kind of skin, and the kind of pinpoints where we can change the thing in the DNA for make you to live longer and healthier. So this is the skin we produce in the lab, in that side, you can see a normal skin, and in this one, also a normal one produced by our laboratory, in which you have the 3 basic layers. So we do already this in the lab. And we use an algorithm that allows us to look at different points into the regulation of the genome to have estimation of the age. So we begin in point 1, in the blue one, say, okay, this tissue we build has this age. We have a patent pending in a process for making that tissue older in the lab, so we can compare the same tissue. And then we do a screening of molecules. We put a different molecule, and then we evaluate if it's getting older, it's actually going back. And this is how we get the things that we have accomplished so far. We were able to understand that measuring the age using the epidermis, which is the upper tissue, is better than using the dermis. This was already reported for another scientist, so it's cool. We are going in the same way. We were able to measure our sample, which was 3 years old, so our algorithm is working. And now we are using tissue aging in the lab, and we were able to make the tissue to be older, around 2 years. The last thing we're doing also is we were able to test some molecules and be able to rejuvenate the age of the skin by 2 months. So this is what at the point that we are right now. And the idea how it's going to impact the world is exactly this. Like, we want to get older, but we want to be healthy at that point. Thank you.
You mentioned biosecurity.
Sure.
And the implications of open source and letting anyone do what they wish. Could you elaborate on your thoughts of how biosecurity plays a role in all of this?
Sure, thank you. That's a question I always suspect too. Everybody does. So the idea is, for example, in Arcturus BioCloud, what we do is just send us the DNA to want to be synthesized. So what the industry does right now, not only our company, but any synthesis company of DNA right now does, is just send the sequence, and we cannot do something that is called blast, which means we look what is in your sequence. And once we look in what is in your sequence, we can tell if there's something in there that could be a toxin or could be something that you shouldn't be synthesizing. So right now it's fairly easy to control, because the companies that have the control right now for DNA synthesis, they have all these protocols in place to be sure that nobody is trying to synthesize something that shouldn't, and also to report who is doing this. So right now it's not proven at all. But we are moving in a way to maybe you will have access of synthesized DNA by yourself. And I have no idea how is it going to be at that point. But this is a thing that we need to think about it. And there are organizations already thinking about it. One of those is DARPA, for example. They're trying to use this technology to be sure we have all the tools in place if something goes wrong, how we can actually use the same technology to actually do that. Because there's a problem in biosecurity in a way some people say, just don't do it. And that's not really true, because what's the problem? We can't stop trying to understand diseases, you know? We have now chikungunya in Brazil, we have diseases. We need to understand genomics to actually be alive, because we're going into some ecosystems and finding some new diseases as we found 30 years ago, probably HIV. So we need to understand more this technology. So it's not a matter just to stop. If we stop, the world won't stop. There are bacteria in there, there are viruses in there. So we need to continue, but we need to do it in a way that what we build is, we are pretty sure when we release something, and that's how governments are moving right now. So I really see we're going in the right path from my point of view.
Lisa, Thomas has a question.
This has been really fascinating. Thank you so much. I have a question thinking back to the slide that you showed, the network that's in Latin America, and how the countries that you started with were selected and where you see the most innovation coming from in the years to come.
Okay, well, I opened the first Biohacker Space in Latin America, which was in Sao Paulo. I was a student at Sao Paulo University at that time, doing part of my PhD in there. So what I understand is, when you talk about biohacking, it's pretty different, depends on where you're talking in Europe, in the United States, or in Latin America. In Europe, it's something more between science and arts. In the United States, it's more citizen science. So everybody goes to BioCurious, and they're going to learn about genetics and do some experiments, which is really cool. In Latin America, I have never tried to say what's the right path. I want to see each country to understand what are the necessities using this technology. And what happened after 2-3 years was that we saw these two paths. One, people building technology, which is cheaper and everybody can use and faster. And another one saying, okay, I want to open a company and try to build biotechnology ecosystem in the region. So it obviously began in Brazil, but when I began to come to the United States, open my own companies, kind of the idea was more global in a way that I knew the people from different countries who were trying to do this, and I see a lot of potential in places as Brazil. Mexico is really, really, really interesting. They're really focusing to biotech. And also Peru is beginning to go. We have working in Ecuador and Argentina, which is more initial work. And we are right now also beginning to study to expand to Africa. Because in Africa, you also have all these necessities of infrastructure and access that are similar to Latin America. So that kind of makes sense. So the first things we did actually was we built a document which tells you how to open a biohacker space from the beginning. And we produced that document basically it's a biotechnology laboratory. It focuses on the machines that you need, in the chemistry you need, but also in the biosecurity and regulation of each country. And we released that document last year in Portuguese, Spanish, English, which I speak both, the three of them. But also we released it in French because the people in Africa, they're translated to French, and we're trying to use that document to incentivize people to actually going into biotech. So I see a lot of things going on lately.
Good question. Who else?
Can you comment on the regulatory environment that you're seeing and the differences in countries in South America as compared to here in the United States?
That's interesting. That's a really good point. So basically, if you want a space of this, in most countries, let's say Brazil, even here in the United States, you have to have the consent of regulation if you were inside a university or outside it. So that's the first good point. What we ask for universities that do research is kind of the same that we ask to anybody that wants to have her private laboratory or wants to have a biohacker space. And that kind of regulation, from my point of view,